So, thank you for coming this afternoon. We're going to be talking about Halloween, good, bad, ugly, or very dangerous. And let me say, many of you don't know me, or some of you don't know me. I grew up in an occultic home. From birth, I was designated as one of the chosen ones. And the whole idea was that I would be trained in everything related to the occult. And that's exactly what happened. And I'll touch on a little bit more as we go through. But before we start, I would like to pray, because it's been very difficult for me to go down some of these roads as I've been preparing for this, because it holds some very dark and challenging memories for me. And you'll get here a little bit about that as we go through. So if you wouldn't mind praying with me. Father, we just pray that you be with us this afternoon, that you cover us with your blood, and that, Lord, you just give me freedom of speech, I pray now in Jesus' name. Amen. Okay, so occult. Before we can get on to Halloween, we need to understand there's a lot more that stands behind Halloween. And before we get to Halloween, I'm going to touch on some of the overview of how the occult actually works and how it's been rebranded so that it's become very attractive to people, and just give you the backstory before we get to the Halloween story. So the meaning of occult is of or relating to magic, astrology, or any system claiming use of knowledge of secret or supernatural powers or agencies. Now, I'm not sure whether you believe in a literal devil, but the reality is he is there. And Occult HQ, the founder was Satan. In the Bible, he's called Lucifer, the serpent or the dragon. And let me remember, I've got this. And in Revelation 12:7-9, it says there was a war in heaven. Michael and his angels waging war with the dragon, and the dragon and his angels waged war. And they were not strong enough, and there was no longer a place for him found in heaven. And the great dragon was thrown down, the serpent of old, who is called the devil and Satan, who deceives the whole world. He was thrown down to the earth, and his angels were thrown down with him. And then in Isaiah, it tells us again about the fall there. And then in Revelation, it tells us what his end is going to be. I grew up in a wealthy home, and I'm going to give you a little bit about my early years just by way of introduction. I'm not going to touch on it in great deal, but there is a book, God Help Me, which is available on the front table and on the rear table as you walk out. They're free of charge. Please feel free to take one. It catalogs the first 21 years of my life and what I went through and the things that actually happened. So my mom was incredibly involved in the occult, quite a few branches of it. And literally from birth, I was set aside and started to be trained. By the age of 9, that training intensified. By the age of 11, it really kicked off, and basically it moved through from there. Now, when you're looking at the occult, it's their methodology is that they each have a unique selling point. In modern terms, we call it a USP. What's a unique selling point? Well, they will always sell it as fun, exciting, as an adventure, becoming better. You can be healed, you can be powerful, you can be rich, you can be fulfilled, you can be enlightened. Remember that word, enlightened. You can be free, and you deserve it. So the different branches of the occult that are out there, and I'm only sharing with you this morning that the ones that I was actually trained in. In other words, the ones that I was set aside, trained in. Yeah, as I say, it's quite difficult for me to speak about some of them. But in all of these, as I was being trained, it was fun. It was exciting. It was an adventure. Part of it was you're going to become better. You're going to ascend through the levels to time of greater understanding. For some, they were hooked in by there will be healing. You become powerful. I grew up in a very wealthy family, very powerful family. They were very wealthy. You'll be fulfilled, you'll be enlightened, you'll be free, and you deserve it. And those are all unique selling points. You see, if the occult or the devil came up to you and said, listen, let me pull you in, and at the end of the day, it's going to lead to your destruction, not many people would buy into that. Most of the people who get involved in the occult and the different branches end up committing suicide, or they suffer from mental health, or they suffer from Great Depression and a whole lot of other things. And we need to ask ourselves the question, why in the day and age we're living in are we seeing things like suicides climb? Why are we seeing unprecedented levels of mental health issues? Why are we seeing unprecedented levels of depression? Why are we seeing the level of evil that is in the world? And there's been a lot happening in the news and that. Nearly anywhere in the world you look at, there's some very dark things happening. Behind that stands the devil. But as I grew up, for me, the devil was the good guy. That was how my family put it across. And I wasn't allowed to go to church. I wasn't allowed to have anything to do with anything that was related to Christianity. And so I really never even knew about God. So how does Satan HQ actually work? Well, the first thing they do, they identify a need or desire, what they call the hooks. What is that person needing or desiring? What is that community needing or desiring? What is this strata of the population needing or desiring? They then devise a strategy. And once they've devised a strategy, it's assigned to a branch office to start to act out. Now, just to tell you that I had an admiral from the Navy, I was living in Rhodesia at the time, fly up and interview me when I was 15 years old to go to the Naval Academy. Think about that for a moment. An admiral from the Navy flying all the way to another country to interview a 15-year-old for the Naval Academy. That's normally not how it works. Normally you will apply, you'll go to the wherever the Navy do the interviews and all of that. In my case, the admiral came to me because he was part of that inner circle, part of the plans that had been set aside for me in terms of training. And when we start speaking about Satan Central, we need to realize that we are dealing with people, very powerful people, in very high places. The guys you see walking around the street with the black t-shirts and maybe the pentagram on their shirt or some sort of other paraphernalia, those are the foot soldiers. The real power rests within the occult and satanic world. The real power rests in the corridors of power at every single level. You will see it in your judiciary, you'll see it in your police service, army, your different brands of the military, you'll see it in politics, you'll see it in business. And very often there's a connection between all of those. And people often ask the question, they say, well, why doesn't this branch do something about that? You ever ask that? Why doesn't the government do this? Or why doesn't the government do that? Or why don't the police do this? Or why doesn't somebody do this? Very often, the decision makers in many of those levels will have some sort of occult involvement because there's a lot of power, there's a lot of money, there's a lot of influence that comes there. So the assignment is passed down to the branch office. The branch office will then begin to implement the plan, and the guys that head up the branch office are the fallen angels, but we're going to call them demons because there's nothing very angelic about them. They work in conjunction, and I want you to listen very carefully, to the enlightened human leaders. You see, the demons, they're demonic. You don't see them unless they manifest. But the enlightened human leaders are the ones that work in conjunction with the demonic forces. The Bible says those powers in the high place that work to implement the plan. And very often that plan is enacted out by the foot soldiers. Now, the foot soldiers we call the deceived or the unenlightened. I want you to think for a moment. How many of you have heard of different things where people say, if you get involved in this, you're going to be enlightened. You're going to have greater understanding, etc., etc. And very often the enlightened are the only ones who know what's really going on behind the scenes. The foot soldiers, the normal people getting involved, they think it's fun, exciting, adventurous, empowering, etc., etc. That's what they see. But there are other things that are at thing behind it. So, before we get down to Halloween, I'm just going to touch on a few of the hooks that are operating in the Veil of the White Horse. And these were hooks that I was actually trained in. By the time I was 15, I was master of many of them. By the time I was 16, I was pretty much master of all of them. When I hit the age of 12 and I came to maturity, I matured very easily, early, my voice broke. I was assigned to two ladies. One was in her late 20s, one was in her early 30s. And I use the word assigned because that's what happened. I was assigned because they were to continue my training in these different branches, which today have become quite acceptable. And you're going to be shocked when I pop some of them up there. I want you to think about that for a moment. If you've had children or you got children, how many of you parents would be happy for your 12-year-old daughter to be passed across to two men in their 20s, late 20s and early 30s, or vice versa, for your son to be passed across to two ladies to train him in their late 30s and late 20s and early 30s? For my family, that was considered normal. And that's why it's been so difficult for me to prepare this talk, because things happened from the age of 12 to 16 that should never, ever have happened to a young boy. I experienced and went through things that, in retrospect, looking as an adult, were horrific and damaging and should never, ever have happened. But I was told this is normal. And you see, that's how the devil works. Once he gets his hooks into a group, a family, an individual, he will put it off as this is normal. And to be perfectly honest, at the time, it was fun, it was exciting, it was adventurous, and all the other hooks that it spoke about there. So I'm going to show you one of the first hooks and one of the first disciplines I was trained in from the age of 12. And as I said, you're going to be shocked because they've actually become very acceptable. Some examples of the branch office: yoga. Yoga works on the principle of there are 7 chakras. The first chakra starts in the genital area, and as you get advanced and get enlightened, they move up until eventually you get to the third eye, which sits in the middle of the forehead. That's the 6th chakra, and that's where the concentration of power starts to sit. And then eventually you merge beyond, and there's this almost a spiritual connection that happens, and you move in to the final, the crown chakra. In grade 7, my final year of junior school, I had a girl sit next to me. Her name was Jane. And she never did her homework. Very pretty girl, but never did her homework. She had long nails. I always did my homework. And one day, she said to me, show me your homework. It was for a very important assignment. And I said to her, Jane, no. And she sat next to me. So she leaned across, and we all wore shorts in Rhodesia because we had something called sunshine nearly all the time. And she stuck her claws into me. And she said, show me your homework. And I just turned and looked at her. And I activated my third eye. Because by then I was well trained in the use of the third eye. And my whole forehead began to just tingle. You could feel the energy just going out from me. In under a minute, Jane ran screaming out of the classroom. And the teacher ran after and said, what's going on? She said, get them off me, get them off me. Because she, in her mind, was visualizing she was being smothered by spiders. She could feel them running all over her. By the age of 11 already, I could levitate off the ground. I could start to move furniture. The man who trained me, the head of the occult group, we would be walking and he said, let me show you power. And he would say to a bird, die, and the bird would fall dead out of the sky. Now some of you are thinking, that's not possible. It's possible. With yoga and all the branches, and we'll touch on another branch just now, they speak about the spirit of Kundalini. How many of you have heard that? Just go look on Facebook. They're offering courses. How to activate the Kundalini spirit. Very, very popular. Meditation. It's good for you. And it is to a certain extent. Mindfulness. You go to just about any NHS thing that says, no, you need to practice mindfulness. And I told the NHS person that to me, he said, I understand mindfulness more than any of you. Look at the symbol. That's the symbol of the Kundalini spirit. What is it? It's the snake. What does the Bible call the serpent? The devil, Lucifer, is the serpent. And you'll find in nearly all of these, that symbol will start to come up. Not only was I trained in that, but the brother or sister of that, of yoga, was Tantra. The basic philosophy of Tantra is everything is divine. There's liberation through expansion and renunciation. Opposites attract. The body is a temple. Just look at it. The body is a sacred vehicle for enlightenment. Direct experience over dogma. Tantra emphasizes personal experience over blind belief and rigid doctrine. The awakening of energy, which is the Kundalini spirit. I was trained in all of that. When you get trained, there are no parameters. There is no morality. There is no good or evil. It's everything. You must experience it by yourself. Your feelings are paramount. Everything else is secondary. And through the merging of your feelings and your experiences, you ascend through all those different chakras until you get the one where you get the merging of the spiritual and the emotional, and everything comes together. And a lot of that's involved in Tantra involves physical sexuality. Now, a lot of these brands I was trained in have now been diverged. The things I'm sharing with you, many of them, they were part of the package deal. But like any good business, Satan or the Occult HQ realizes there comes a time you've got to rebrand. So you rebrand, you diversify, you break it up into bite-sized pieces so that you can draw more people in. Part of that package was crystal healing. That is the healing through crystals, vibrations. Different crystals give you different outcomes, energy vibrations. And the method of use, crystals would be placed on or in the body and focus on energy balance and inner growth. And you might be interested to know there's a group operating around our area, which all go sit up on the hillside, all ladies, no clothes on, and they use different crystals in different ways. I was trained in all of it. But how many people get drawn in? Go look on Facebook. You'll see there's groups advertising all the time to pull people in. Next one. Sound bath. A meditative practice involving immersive sounds and vibrations. Resonant instruments bathe the participant in soothing, echoing sound. Relax while listening, sitting or lying down, as a practitioner plays gongs, chimes, bowls, etc. The benefits are deep relaxation, stress reduction, balancing the mind, promoting healing. And while all that's happening, and this was pretty much part of every single occult experience that we had in the background, and there would often be incense that is burning as well, and that sound is to lull you, and they will tell you, I want you to just relax and clear your mind. It's a dangerous thing, clearing your mind. The next one was spiritism. Spiritism, again, very, very active in our area, in the Vale of the White Horse, very active pretty much all over the world now. Very strong Facebook groups that promote it, etc. They believe in the immortality of the soul, communion with spirits. We're sort of beginning to get close towards Halloween is going. You can talk with your loved one. If you lost a loved one, they'll come up to you and say, would you like to talk to them? I can help you. Matter of fact, the group that I was part of, they would read the obituaries. And then they would phone the people, get their numbers, phone them, and say, we can help you get in touch with your loved one. Or send us an item of theirs, and we'll be able to get you in touch with them. They believe in reincarnation and cause and effect. The man who headed up this group, in our occult group, he had tremendous power. And often it was through spiritism, yoga, the different branches, that he would draw people in, and with that power, he would then use that power, and very often he would end up having an affair with the lady if there was a married couple. And then he would phone the husband afterwards and said, oh, I've just slept with your wife. In the time that I knew him, he was responsible for between 30 to 40 breakups in marriages. That was his objective. Tremendous power that was available. By the way, there's no such thing as ghosts. They're not your living relative. They are demons impersonating them. Part of my training growing up, and that started much younger than 12, from the age of 9, I was assigned my spiritual guides, my mentors, my channelers, and they would materialize in my room. One was a Chinese guy, one was a Red Indian, and we'd have long conversations, and they would unveil all sorts of secrets and challenges and all of that. And for me, that was normal. In fact, I got on quite well with them. We had some really good conversations. The thing is, when I became a Christian, and I touch on it in the book, the next time they materialized after I became a Christian, they didn't look like an Indian. They didn't look like a Chinese person. They looked like what they were, demons. And it was a totally different ballgame. Don't worry, we get into the whole Halloween thing. We get in there. Witchcraft. I was trained in that. Now you'll hear people say, well, the thing with witchcraft is it's harmless and you get good and bad witches. No, you don't. These are all the different branches of witchcraft, and there's a few others there that are not even covered there. Witchcraft is directly from the devil. Once a month, we would have the big meeting of all the occult related branches, and it was on a farm outside of town which had a big barn, which from the outside just looked like a barn, but when you walked in, it was a satanic temple. And all sorts of things that went on there, and it was the rich and the famous, the powerful. There were priests, there were leaders of religious organizations, there were bankers, there were government officials who were all part of that, and there would be this big satanic witchcraft meeting that came together, and horrendous things happened there. Horrendous things happened to me there. And I was part of horrendous things as I advanced through the stages. But there is nothing good in witchcraft. The next branch I was trained in was Satanism. See, I was brought up to know or believe that Satan was my friend. He was the channel through which you can gain great power, and there's all different brands of Satanism. They're all just derivatives of each other and smoke screens of each other. But it's the belief in Satan as a liberal being or deity, source of freedom, rebellion, knowledge, and empowerment. Remember, I used the word enlightenment. You become enlightened. You break away from the moral restraints that hold you in the world. Your emotions, your feelings become right. So it doesn't matter what you do as long as it's right for you. Ritual worship and offerings. Now I'll touch on some of those offerings a little bit later. Rejection of oppressive religious authority. I was never ever allowed to go near a church or have anything to do with anybody who was a Christian. They promote individuality and breaking of taboos. Free for all. Be rebellious. How many of you remember the flower power movement of the 60s? Some of you might have been part of it. Go to university, smoke pot. Free love, free expression. You thought you were just breaking out of the constraints of the previous generation, when in reality you were actually getting into all the tenets of Satanism. Next one, this I wasn't trained in, but this is areas that I've observed through the years. Film, leadership as influence. Films play a huge part on forming our worldview. The press, radio, music, gaming, TV, internet, pornography, all those, they all play a huge part now with the advent of AI. I was reading about an event that happened just a few days ago with Charlie Kirk in America, And one news station will call him a radical right-wing activist. Another news station will call him a conservative. So what is he, a conservative or a radical right-wing activist? You see, it's in the perception of whichever one of these is writing the story. And there is tremendous power in all of these to shape our perception, to get us to believe in a certain way and act in a certain way. This one here, gaming, is becoming huge. The games start off innocent, and as you move through the levels, and often they'll even tell you in the game, you're going to get more and more enlightened until you start to unlock certain levels. And that's exactly the way it works in the occult. Whether it be yoga or crystal healing or Satanism or Spiritism, you advance through the levels, and each level unlocks a new level of enlightenment, which are going to bring you to the point where you ascend above all others. Leadership is influence. So one of the things I've observed through the years, because I speak on the occult and get called in to consult on it quite a lot, is that I've noticed the moral degeneration of a society is reflected in the tattoos people are wearing. 60s and 70s, Popeye was the most popular tattoo that people had. I'm sure many of you have seen Popeye tattoos. Or perhaps it was a little puppy, a little cartoon puppy. Maybe Donald Duck. This cartoon here on the right, it's an actual, not a cartoon, tattoo. That's an actual tattoo that people are wearing today. And I've observed as I've looked around, the tattoos that people are getting done are becoming darker and darker and darker and more aligned with the occult. And there was huge pressure put on me as a young man that as soon as I turned 16, I was to get a number of tattoos. It was really encouraged in the occult. But there was a law in Rhodesia that you couldn't have a tattoo till you were 16. And I got saved, became a Christian soon after 16. This tattoo here, recognize it? That's the Kundalini spirit. This is an actual tattoo on an actual body with the 7 levels of the chakra. You'll see this on lots and lots of people. All of these are tied into the Kundalini spirit and yoga and Eastern religions, etc. And you'll see derivatives and combinations on this if you just stop and look around you. So what people are actually having tattooed onto their bodies. And I'll explain why that's different. So what about Halloween? Halloween has its origins in the Celtic shaman ceremony, which was the time when the spirits crossed from the place of the dead to the place of the living. They would have bonfires going to scare away the spirits. They wore disguises to hide themselves, and they offered offerings to the spirits so that they didn't get attacked or their crops would be good the next year around. And you see elements of this in pretty much every culture. The end of harvest, they would have offerings and all sorts of things. I grew up in Africa, big part of that out there as well. So along came the Christians, and they decided, whoa, there's such a strong following of this Halloween that we need to do something about it. So they did what in modern terms we call rebranding. They took what was a pagan Celtic festival and they moved to rebrand it and called it All Saints and All Souls Day, which was on All Hallows Eve. It was a Christian adaptation, and they said we're honoring the dead. it has failed dismally. The far greater majority of people still celebrate Halloween, and they think nothing to do with this at all. The medieval traditions of Halloween, souling, prayers for the dead in exchange for food, guising, wearing costumes or disguises to hide from, and carving turnip lanterns to carve to ward off evil. Now, why do you think they did all that if they didn't really didn't believe in evil? Was it just fun? You see, Satan's done a good job of rebranding. What previous generations and centuries knew had a real demonic content, Satan's rebranded it. And it's fun. Not only is it fun, but it also brings a lot of money. You walk into the supermarkets, beginning of September, sometimes already in August, and what can you see for sale? Halloween stuff. Big, big money in that. But I mean, after all, it's just innocent fun, isn't it? The 10 most classic Halloween costumes in 2024 were these. Not in order of preference, they were all came in. Unfortunately, that one's not showing up so well. Ghosts, witch, vampire, skeleton, devil, grim reaper. So let's unpack that a bit. Ghosts, no such thing, but there are demons. And normally when people watch horror movies and that, or the zombie movies, there's an element of fear. They often don't walk out of those movies and say, oh, I feel so happy now. There's an element of fear. Because fear is a powerful motivator. I remember watching the first Jaws movie, and I had sat down with my date, and there was some young lady sitting in front of us, and the shark broke through at the back of the boat when Brody was leaning over, and the lady in the front, the young woman in the front row got such a fright she jumped over and landed in my arms. I decided after that, go see Jaws often, because you get to meet lots of people that way. Vampire, death, demons. Witchcraft, I've touched on that. Casting of spells. Skeleton, does a skeleton depict life or death? Death. Grim Reaper, death. The devil is the deceiver. So the 10 or the most popular costumes are all fear, demons, death, really wholesome subjects. And these were the most popular. Trick or treat. It's just harmless fun. Just a chance for our kids to get some sweets, which they will eat and have so much energy, they're going to go ballistic. The dentist will be happy, and the parents will be exhausted after trying to calm them down. Its actual origins were curse or blessing. And it was a way of extorting from people by witches and other occult-related avenues. You either give us something or we will curse you. You either give us some sweeties or we will damage your property. We will egg it or do whatever or break your post box. And as I say, it's the one day in the year where people get licensed to get up to all sorts of things that their parents would never let them do at any other time. If your children went up and threw eggs or broke next door neighbor's property, how excited would you be at any other time? You speak to police departments around the world. You ask them what day is the one which you dread the most. It'll be Halloween. Is that because the kids are naturally bad and the parents are bad? Not at all. So let me give you the insider story. We participated in quite a few Halloweens from the occult side. What Halloween means to the occult world. It is an evening where Satan and witchcraft and the casting of spells and the different things are celebrated. It's a huge day, and it is the day when the doors open between the supernatural realm and the natural realm. I've been in ministry 45 years now. I often get called into cases where there's been demon possession, people are stressed, there had been some sort of occult involvement, and you probably think, yeah, it's not real. Let me tell you a little story. My church back in South Africa, 8 o'clock at night, it was still the days when you could get up to the door without going through 50 layers of security. And there was a knock at the door at 8 o'clock at night. And I opened the door, and there was a lady. She was in her late 70s already. And this guy, he was probably mid-30s. And he said to me, "Pastor, we need you to come to our house." I knew him. I said, "Why?" He said, "Well, something happened today." And I called Faith. That was the lady's name. And she had a reputation for dealing with the paranormal and those different things. And she came along, and she was too scared to even go into my yard. So we've come to you. Now, normally I don't respond to those things immediately but he says it's so bad we can't even get into our house. So I said, "Okay, explain to me what happened." He said, "My mom went to the local dump and she found a little child's pedal car, which she brought home. And she lived opposite them, and she came across the road and gave it to my kids as a gift. But within a short space of time, all sorts of funny things started to happen." Now, a little bit of backstory. He was a new Christian. His mom headed up the local branch of the Spiritism, and his dad was the president of the Freemasons. Against my better judgment, I phoned my elders. We didn't have mobile phones in those days. I phoned them on the landline and said, "Guys, pray." And we pulled up outside his house, and as I climbed out, I could feel the evil just coming off that house like waves. The hair on the back of my head just went. And as I opened the door, you could just feel there was this evil. And the guy standing next to me, he went as white as a ghost, if I can use that expression. And he said, "That toy car was just here when we left, and is now at the end of the passage. There was nobody in the house. It had moved itself." And as he said those words, next to that little toy car, a solid black figure manifested, probably about 4.5 feet tall. And Godfrey just started stressing. But I walked towards it, and I engaged with it. And as Christians, we know we have authority. And this thing disappeared. And I said to the guy, I said, "Do you have a 44-gallon drum?" An empty one. And you know, in South Africa, 44-gallon drums are very popular because they get turned into barbecues. So just about every family has a 44-gallon drum. And he brought this empty drum, and we put this toy car, which was probably about this long and about this wide, into the drum. I said, "Do you have any petrol?" He said, yes, I went and got the petrol, and I threw the match into it, and this thing started to burn. It had been burning for about 3 minutes. We were standing around probably 1.5 meters from the drum, not too close. And out of the middle, there was just this, something exploded, and this ball of fire flew up, about the size of a football, and it just hovered there, and it rotated around, and suddenly went and hit the lady in the face. And the face caught fire. It was just starting towards winter then, and I just happened to have a light jacket on, which I whipped off and smothered over her head. Killed the oxygen. We rushed to the hospital. She had 3rd-degree burns. You see, folk, the reality is that is not innocent. His mom and his dad were both deep into the occult. And this gift she brought into their home had a demonic attachment. And I'll speak about that a little bit more just now. So for us who used to be in the occult, the focus was on Satan. There was more demonic power released that night than any other night of the year. There would often be on that night human sacrifice. The leader of whatever occult group there was would often get somebody pregnant 9 months before it was supposed to be Halloween, and on Halloween's night that would be the human sacrifice. I don't know if that's still the practice, probably is, but nowadays we have abortion, which is far more lucrative. Greater influence on people in the surrounding area because of the release of demonic spirits. The night of curses. And if you lived in Africa, you understand the power of curses. I've seen people die within 2 or 3 days. The meeting would degenerate into a night of debauchery with all these other things I've touched on, and the release of the spirit and the flesh and everything else. It was also considered the night of first contact. And I'll come back to that in a minute. Night where more people were blinded to the reality of what was going on, and the night where Satan and the demons rejoiced. Huge power released. Night of first contact. What does that mean? What many people don't understand is that a demon can't exert any force on your life in any way unless you open a door. They can't. But once the door is opened, you've opened it. And they can start to exert force. And it's often in the after Halloween that there will be a major uptick in all sorts of things, which I'm going to touch on now. I still consult worldwide through Zoom and FaceTime to different occult-related cases. I've done a huge amount of counseling through the years in this area. Many years ago, I was a consultant for the police back in South Africa for satanic-related crimes. But after Halloween night, we saw an uptick in the following. Increased fear and anxiety. Children, parents that had taken part in it, there was an increase in fear and anxiety. Suddenly the child didn't want to be left alone, or the parent, the mom would be sitting at home and there would be fear and anxiety. Disrupted sleep and bad dreams, often accompanied by bedwetting. Suddenly the child doesn't want to go, they want to sleep between mom and dad. And they come around 16, 17-year-olds, they're still sleeping between mom and dad. Trouble paying attention. What is one of the greatest challenges in education today? HDH. Trouble paying attention. Feelings of being tormented or pursued. Wake up from the dream. I don't know what it is. Something was chasing me. What was chasing me? I don't know. Just something was chasing me and I was scared. Manifestation of an invisible friend. That's quite a popular one. Remember I told you when I was being trained in the occult, these demons would manifest in my room because you didn't know they were demons. They'd be in India. or Chinese or somebody else. Feelings of depression and low self-worth. And I'll touch on that a bit. Or feelings of euphoria, increased sexual urges in those of the appropriate age. Often you'd be approached by someone who would invite you to one of those other things I've spoken about before. We would see a major uptick in suicidal feelings, and people would say, I hear voices in my head. Feelings of depression and low self-worth. You're no good. You're useless. Why don't you just kill yourself? You're not no good to anybody. Just go off yourself. You'll be doing everybody a favor. And if I've heard that expression 1,000 times, you can multiply it. Trouble controlling your emotions. Very often after Halloween, we would see a massive uptick of angry outbursts and kids controlling their emotions, and the manifestation of the rebellious spirit. Suddenly the kids would become impossible. And mom and dad would say, I don't know what's happened to them. They become something else. Of course, if they were heading towards the teenage years, we would say, it's just because they're a teenager. Well, I brought up teenagers. I've been principal of a school. We had lots of teenagers who stayed over in our home. I never once had a problem with a teenager being rebellious. All of these were manifestations that we encountered straight after Halloween. Now, just think for a moment the other things I've previously gone through. Rebellious spirit, that's part of Satanism. Sexuality, that's part of the whole Kundalini spirit. Feelings of euphoria, go with your feelings. All of these can be taken straight back to the occult involvement that goes on behind the scenes. So that's why I don't believe Halloween's good. Not that this is going to necessarily manifest straight away, but in many it does. But somewhere along the line, and especially if you are opening the door, and Satan will bide his time, and at the right time he will bring the person across their path that will pull them in. And invariably, remember, he has an agenda. His agenda is he wants to destroy you. He's not your friend. Suicidal feelings, voices in the head, feelings of depression, low self-worth. Why are we seeing so many young people kill themselves? Why is depression at an all-time high? Why is ADHD at an all-time high? Why is teenage pregnancy at an all-time high? You can say they're all unrelated, but they're not. They're a part of the plan that goes all the way back to Satan HQ. And he's disseminated this information through all the different branches, and there's many others I haven't touched on tonight. I just touched on the ones that I was actually trained in. There are a whole lot more. And I really want to encourage you to take my little book when you go and read through it. But that's what's behind it. Deuteronomy says, there shall not be found among you anyone who makes his son or his daughter pass through the fire, who uses divination, who practices witchcraft, or one who interprets omens, or a sorcerer, or one who casts a spell, or a medium, or a spiritist, or one who calls up the dead. What's the whole focus of Halloween? All of those. Look at these words. For whoever does these things is detestable to the Lord. And because of these detestable things, the Lord your God will drive them out before you. My life was damaged by growing up in the occult, by being part of all these things I've shared with you. I know firsthand the pain and the anguish and the trauma that comes when you have to deal with that as you move through life. For me, I found Christ. But there were years of healing that had to take place because of all the trauma of the things I've shared here today. And Halloween is the first hook that the devil would use to draw kids in. And before you know it, those things will start to manifest in different ways and different times because the demonic have been given an open door into their lives. And at that point, you get transferred from the kingdom of darkness, what the Bible says, into the kingdom of light. And that's where that power is broken. And that's the difference that actually comes to play. God is not your power, it's God's power that does the thing. We had more time, and if folk are interested, I could tell you the battles I had in that in the first probably 7-8 years of my Christian walk, but especially in the first few months, it was horrendous. Because the devil doesn't let go easy. He seeks to pull you in. And as I say, I grew up in an incredibly wealthy family, and I wouldn't have walked out on millions if something real hadn't happened. Because I'm not stupid, I've got quite a good IQ. Something happened, and his name was Jesus Christ, that made the difference in my life and set me free from all of those things. Yes, through the years, I've had to walk down some roads and deal with all the baggage, but God has brought the liberty and the freedom and the forgiveness. That was really important, because you can imagine the anger and the bitterness that comes when the person who's supposed to be protecting you puts you into that position where you get that level of abuse and that happening to you, and tells you this is normal. You need to embrace it because it's all part of your journey of enlightenment. Horrendous. Okay, good, folks. Thank you.